He already kind of went over this a little bit, but I'm Bri Tippetts. I have my social media up there. Like he said, I graduated from UNLV in 2016 with a degree in fine arts, a focus on painting and drawing. While I was there, I studied for a few years under Tim Babington, who is a modern artist, but also used to work in the film and comics industry. And so I got to learn from him how to ink comics professionally. After that, I moved out here with my husband in Birmingham. We've been out here about 5 years now. But I love to make horror-themed art through all kinds of different mediums and styles. And I always grew up loving horror and comics. But basically, I've always made them since I was a kid. I mean, I don't know how to put a date on when I started. But this one was, I really wanted to make something that I wanted to see on comic book shelves. Like, I really wanted to see a graphic novel that had more of a film touch to it. And it was very much inspired by Japanese horror movies and traditional ghost stories. So I'm going to start with traditional ghost stories. They have roots in horror from the Kaidan, which are traditional ghost stories. By the way, I have a lot of Japanese terms in here. I'm doing them to the best of my knowledge, but I'm not perfect, so I apologize in advance. But the stories are told both to entertain the listeners and also teach a moral message. Ghosts in Japan are known as yuri, and they have been around since the beginning, a lot like our ghost stories have been around basically since our start. Their culture's views on the dead and afterlife are very inspired by Buddhism. You'll see a heavy focus in reincarnation, salvation, punishment, revenge, that sort of stuff. And then, weirdly enough, Anthony picked the same picture for the stories. That all kind of ties in.
It's a great picture.
And then Yuri. So, just a little side point, I tried to put in some of my concept art for my book, just me practicing certain styles of ghosts and different things. So some of these slides are actually my art. But Yuri are a subset of a larger group called Yokai, which encompasses all of the strange and supernatural beings in Japanese folk stories. They're based on the belief that humans carry a god inside them up until when you die, and then it's released, and then it's kind of combined and infused with a supernatural power. Some of them watch over humans and protect them, but the ones I'm focusing on have some unfinished business that they need to settle, which is also common in a lot of American film and folklore. So, they have different definitions technically to this day, but overall, it's a ghost. And then the current image of a Yuri dates back to the Edo period. It's often pale-faced with messy, long black hair, white burial kimono, and no feet. It's predominantly females. Think about like The Ring and those kind of films, and I'll talk about that more later too. And their ghost whose desire is believed to have tethered them to the living, so whatever unfinished business they have is what is keeping them here. But they have a caveat that I found very interesting compared to a lot of our common beliefs, in which you have to feel it in your very last breath to be able to take that onto with the dead. Otherwise, you're not a revenge spirit, I guess. So, but yeah, you have to feel it in your very last breath. Onryo, the vengeful spirit. So this is one of the ghosts that really inspired, I hate to say villain, but like the main creature in my story, or ghost in my story. That's Claire of Light at the top. I'm trying not to put too much away. But they're one of the most powerful creatures on the planet. In ancient times, they were used to explain natural disasters. They're a spirit who dies while being consumed of feelings of revenge, like I said earlier. There's ways to pacify it. Usually you have to know its purpose. And once you know its purpose, you can often kind of come to a conclusion, but only if they're okay with it and want it. They're a little tricky And then I just wanted to do a quick little side thing of other popular Yuri and Yuri stories, just because there were some that were fun, but didn't like a whole slide. So there's the Kappa, which is a curious creature with a beaked mouth, scaly body, tortoise shell, and a plate on its head that's filled with magical liquid. There's different beliefs for what the magical liquid can do, or how they get the magical liquid, but there's all kinds of fun stories behind that one. Tengu is a long-nosed goblin that is said to be the reincarnation of wicked priests that are being punished. They also have hexagonal hats, feather fans, and can cause illnesses. And then there's the Atako. They're a shamanistic medium, usually a woman. They're traditionally blind and can speak to the dead. They're a lot like how we depict gypsies in our culture. Oni is their term for demons, Obake for monsters. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the legend of Oiwa, who is on the right. Poor Oiwa was engaged to a man who fell in love with someone else. And they do not believe in being able to go outside of that arranged marriage. So he decided to try to poison Oiwa. And it didn't quite kill her, it just messed up the side of her face, to which she saw in a mirror and then freaked out and died, and then came back to haunt her beloved. The Kuchisaki Onna, the slit mouth woman. This one is probably the biggest influence on my character Clara and my book Rictus. She has a big wide open mouth and I just loved that visual, but I just felt like her story needed more, and I think that's kind of what got the ball rolling for the book in the first place. But she is also a vengeful spirit. She covers her face with a mask and carries around a sharp object. She has the traditional long, straight black hair, pale skin, and she's considered to be beautiful other than her split the legend of Kuchisaki Onna. What she does is she waits for passers-by and she asks them if she's beautiful. When she asks them, she has her face covered, and if they say no, she kills them. If you say yes, she takes off her mask and asks you again if she's beautiful. If you say no, once again, you die. If you say yes, she gives you a smile that looks just like hers. She can look nice and pretty. There's different ways to get rid of her. You can tell her she looks average in appearance, apparently, and that'll get rid of her. Or you can distract her with money and candles, much like myself. So, the origin stories, there's all kinds of different ones. In some, she's an adulterous wife or a mistress of a samurai, and when he finds out she's disloyal, he cuts her from ear to ear. And then there's some really weird ones where, like, there's a botched dentist surgery or a medical surgery, and then she just comes back for revenge for that. But this is from an actual film depiction in the corner, and then that's a comic depiction of her from a different comic. Japanese Yuri horror films, once again, kind of just wanted to tie it in with film just because it so heavily influenced my book, and I know Under the Mountain likes to do a lot of things with them as well. So Yuri have also been popularly a theme for Japanese horror films. It spread on to America, basically they started out with a heavy theme on vengeful ghosts like the Yuri, with kaiju monsters like Godzilla. But it slowly started to change recently. Now more of the themes are haunted houses, breaking up nuclear families, and monstrous mothers. So I kind of gave a list of some of the important Japanese horror films on the left that involve Yuri, and then a few American ones. There was an interesting period in the early 2000s with horror films in America where we finally were getting access to more foreign films, and because of this, we started experimenting more with some of their storytelling since it was also foreign to others in the country. highly recommend House as well if you want like a really artsy, bizarre Japanese horror ghost film. And I think it's PG or something too, so like, I don't remember it being that bad. Like, it's kind of fun to jump into. So my book, Rictus, when I was writing it, obviously I was very inspired by Japanese ghosts and also the American tradition of passing on urban legends. I grew up in the 90s, and urban legends were a huge theme in horror films, so I just kind of wanted to tie in something that was familiar to me as well. But yeah, I've always made comics. This one took me a little over a year to make, a few months to write. I did the concept art for it, I drew it, inked it, and put it all together. The setting and synopsis, so this is some of the character design and some of the settings when I was trying to kind of figure it out. As you can see, there's a little missed call poster in there. But it takes place in a small, mostly quiet town of Hanscom, which, if you're an It fan, one of the main characters.
Big bad.
Yep. There's a curse on the town caused by the infamous dark spirit of Claire Blight, and it's up to a group of teenagers to put a stop to the curse and to silence her angry spirit, and it may cost them their lives. So just to tie it all in, once again, just heavy Japanese inspiration, obviously with Clara, with Yanryu, with Kuchisaka, Ona Legends. But yeah, and then there's also, like I said, some Easter eggs of little like Japanese horror film posters and themes in my book as well, which I will be selling at the end and signing. And you can also ask me questions as well. And before I do questions, I was going to read part of my comic, and then I realized that'd be kind of tricky to do, so I decided I would do a traditional Japanese ghost story, if that's okay with you guys. About the Mujina, which is a shapeshifter, and I chose it because they're often depicted like werewolves, and that's kind of monsters. Little biased. On the Akasaka Road in Tokyo, there is a slope called Kino Kunizaka, which means the slope of the province of Ki. I do not know why it is called the slope of the province of Ki. On one side of this slope, you see an ancient moat, deep and very wide, with high green banks rising up to some place of gardens. And on the other side of the road extend the long and lofty walls of an imperial palace. Before the era of street lamps and jinrikishas, which is a two-wheel cart pulled by a man, this neighborhood was very lonesome after dark, and belated pedestrians would go miles out of their way rather than mount the Kino Kunizaka alone after sunset, all because of a Mujina that used to walk there. The last man who saw the Mujina was an old merchant of the Kayobashi quarter who died about 30 years ago. This is the story as he told it. One night, at a late hour, he was hurrying up the Kino Kunizaka when he perceived a woman crouching by the moat, all alone and weeping bitterly. Fearing that she intended to drown herself, he stopped to offer her any assistance or consolation in his power. She appeared to be a slight and graceful person, handsomely dressed, and her hair was arranged like that of a young girl of good family. "O Joshu, honorable damsel," he exclaimed, approaching her. "O Joshu, do not cry like that. Tell me what the trouble is, and if there be any way to help you, I shall be glad to help you." He really meant what he said, for he was a very kind man. But she continued, hiding her face from him with one of her long sleeves. "O Joshu," he said again, as gently as he could, please listen to me. This is no place for a young lady at night. Do not cry, I implore you. Only tell me how I may be of some help to you." Slowly she rose up, but turned her back to him, and continued to moan and sob behind her sleeve. He laid his hand lightly upon her shoulder and pleaded, "O Joshu, O Joshu, O Joshu, listen to me just for one little moment. O Joshu, O Joshu." Then that O Joshu turned around and dropped her sleeve and stroked her face with her hand. And the man saw that she had no eyes or nose or mouth, and he screamed and ran away. Up Kino Kunizaka he ran, and all was black and empty before him. On he ran, never daring to look back. And at last he saw a lantern, so far away that it looked like the gleam of a firefly, and he made for it. It proved to be only the lantern of an itinerant soba seller, who had set down his stand by the roadside, but any light and any human companionship was good after that experience. And he flung himself down at the feet of the soba seller, crying out, "Ah, ah, ah!" "Hooray, hooray!" roughly exclaimed the soba man. "Here, what is the matter with you? Anybody hurt you?" "No, nobody hurt me," panted the other. "Only, ah, ah!" "Only scared you?" queried the peddler unsympathetically. "Robbers?" "Not robbers, not robbers," gasped the terrified man. I saw a woman by the moat, and she showed me. I cannot tell you what she showed me." "Ha! Was it anything like this that she showed you?" cried the soba man, stroking his own face, which therewith became like unto an egg, and simultaneously the light went out. Any questions? Yeah.
What else did you write?
I've written a couple of other graphic novels. One is called Splitfoot and Other Short Stories, and it is also at Sanctum as well as this book.
So obviously you're a big anime fan.
I was when I was younger, definitely, yes. Yeah, I need to get back into it.
Well, first of all, sorry, I didn't know you were pointing at her, not me. But my question is, how do you feel about the depiction of Japanese ghosts in non-horror media, like in Miyazaki's movies?
I love it. I think any take on ghosts or, I don't mind if it's silly and whimsical or creepy. I mean, I prefer creepy, but I like whimsical too. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So one of the things I find really interesting is just how many similarities you find over the world in ghost stories and myths. Thinking about the Split Mouth Woman, there is not actually a ghost story, but there was the urban myth in Europe about this idea that gypsies would kidnap children and cut their mouths like that to sell them as clowns. And it's famously depicted in this movie called The Man Who Laughs. You've probably seen pictures of it because it influenced how Heath Ledger looked in
For the
Batman.
Joker, yeah.
And so I guess have you any thoughts just about that idea of just how how we seem to all kind of.
I know, it's tricky. I guess we just, I know, I was kind of trying to think of that. I mean, I guess we just all have this, what happens next, and somehow, I don't know how we all came up with ghosts, but I like it. But yeah, it is fascinating. It is, yeah.
Are you self-published or did you go the traditional route?
Self-published, yeah.
Kind of easier anyway.
Yeah.
Do you draw traditionally or do you?
Yeah, so what I do normally is I will pencil out the pages, I'll ink it, and then as a last little touch sometimes I'll just make sure the DPI is nice on the computer, but I'm not really great with the computer stuff.
It's okay. I'm not.
Cool.
I have a question. Who would you say are the influences for your comic book art? Because when I was looking at some of your pictures, it kind of clicked that they had always reminded me of something, but I didn't know what it was until now. It reminded me of some of the art that Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird did for the original Ninja Turtles comic books.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that I'd say they were an influence, not that I don't like the Ninja Turtle comics. But probably, I mean, I always loved Tim Burton as a kid, and I think it all kind of stretched from there, and that's why I have such elongated features in a lot of my characters. I always loved that. But comic book wise, I mean, Bernie Wrightson, I always loved his stuff. Mike Mignola, that kind of stuff. The heavy dark shadows. Any other questions?
Yeah, so I was just curious, one of the things that I know I always hear about artists who try to do comics is they get really disheartened by how much they have to draw the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I guess I was just curious if you have any, thoughts about how you manage that or
I would
advice
say,
for people.
yeah, My best trick was never feel bad about like breaks if you're getting like frustrated, because overall it helps mentally to just like step away for a minute. But also treating yourself, like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like a little candy if you get through something. I know that's silly, but like sometimes I do little things to just motivate myself, like I can watch a movie after I do these ones. I don't know. Just little tricks to trick your brain, I guess. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, so besides the Japanese ghost stuff, in Rictus, there's obviously like an influence of teen movies, teen horror movies. Were there any particular ones of those that were influential to you?
Definitely One Missed Call. I really liked the Japanese version. The American one's good too, but I really like the Japanese version of that one. Fun fact, it's actually my ringtone. But probably One Missed Call, Scream. I always loved Scream. I know that's more of like an American one, but yeah. And then Candyman. Candyman was like third in my childhood. Passing all the curse kind of a thing. Yeah.
Sorry. You were talking about wanting to do a comic book with a cinematic feel to it.
Yeah.
Were this to be made into a movie, who do you think would be great for the characters for it?
I never thought of that. I may have to get back to you on that one.
Fair enough.
I definitely would try to work Bill Hader, I think, but.
That's a really good question.
So your discipline, did you have a time where you set aside to write and draw, or did you just do it when you had inspiration?
Well, a while ago, I was working as a nanny, so like when I wrote during that period of time, it was just whenever I found time. But now that I'm doing my art full time, I kind of have like, a little schedule of like, I'm going to pencil this many pages this day, and then I sale income, and I kind of just set little goals for myself for each day. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what is the, I guess, editing and revision process like for you with this medium in particular? You know, I mean, I imagine it can be disheartening sometimes in terms of laying out pages and such.
Yeah. Over the years, it's gotten easier, I have to say. Like, I just say do it. Like, my biggest thing was like if you look, I have some books I made a few years ago that are just not great, but I was happy that I finished them, and so I still, like, made copies of them and was excited about it, and then, like, you just kind of get used to the repetition, and then eventually, like, I've gotten up to this book. This is by far not my first book, but it is disheartening sometimes. Like, I look back at some of them, I'm like, oh, line work, or oh, I should have fixed this, or, you know, but yeah, I say just make it, just keep making them, and eventually you'll find something you like after it. Anything else? Well, cool. I'll be selling my books and taking any other questions if you think of anything. Thank you, guys.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming. While Bri gets set up, we're going to do a little raffle here for a couple of prizes that are